How did a unit created to protect the emperor become his greatest threat? Since the dawn of the Roman Empire, the Praetorian Guard stood as a shield of the most powerful men in the ancient world. A select force, chosen from the finest soldiers, whose sole mission was to safeguard the emperor's life. However, over time, the history of these guardians took a dark turn. What began as a loyal and disciplined force eventually became the greatest danger to those they swore to protect. How did the emperor's defenders become his executioners? Problem statement. The Praetorian Guard is one of the most enigmatic and feared military units in Roman history. Their mere presence commanded both respect and fear. They were created to protect the emperor, but over the centuries, they became an uncontrollable force, capable of deciding the fate of the empire with the tip of their swords. Unlike regular legions, which defended the empire's frontiers, the Praetorian Guard did not fight distant battles or march through conquered lands. Their war was waged in the heart of Rome, within the corridors of power, in the shadows of the palace. They were the closest force to the emperor, his advisors, his executioners, and at times his greatest threat. From their foundation under Augustus to their brutal dissolution by Constantine the Great, the Praetorians played a central role in countless intrigues, betrayals, and conspiracies. They not only protected emperors, but also chose them, sold them to the highest bidder, and even killed them when they were no longer useful. Historians have debated for centuries whether the Praetorian Guard was a necessary institution for the stability of the empire, or if, on the contrary, its corruption and ambition contributed to Rome's decline. How could a force designed to maintain order become the very source of chaos? The story of the Praetorian Guard is a testament to how absolute power can corrupt even the most loyal. In this documentary, we will explore their origins, their rise, and their downfall. We will see how they transformed from protectors into executioners, and how their influence in Roman politics left an indelible mark on history. Because in the end, the very soldiers who swore to protect the emperor were the ones who decided who would live and who would die. Before the Pretorians, Roman generals already had bodyguards, but they did not always trust them. Warfare in ancient Rome was not only fought on the battlefield, but also in the shadows, where betrayal could mean the difference between victory and death. From the earliest days of the Republic, military leaders understood that their survival depended not only on the strength of their armies, but also on those closest to them. This need gave rise to the first protective units, the direct predecessors of the feared and powerful Praetorian Guard. Problem statement. The need for personal protection was not an invention of the empire. Since the days of Rome's monarchy, military leaders had surrounded themselves with small groups of trusted warriors who escorted them both in and out of battle. These early bodyguards were chosen from among the best soldiers, and in many cases, from those who displayed the greatest loyalty to their commander. As Rome expanded, this practice evolved. During the Republic, generals often traveled with personal escorts formed from elite soldiers selected from their own troops. There was no formal organization for these units, but their role was clear: to protect their leader at all costs. One of the earliest precedents for Praetorian Guard was the Extraordinarii, a group of soldiers chosen from Rome's allied forces. They were assigned special tasks, including protecting the general during campaigns. Later, during the time of Scipio Aemilianus, a contingent of 500 soldiers was specifically designated for his protection during the war in Hispania. Even Julius Caesar, during his campaigns, preferred to surround himself with a personal guard of Germanic cavalrymen, known for their ferocity and unwavering loyalty. The need for a reliable escort was becoming increasingly evident, but there was still no permanent protection force for Rome's rulers. The political and military chaos that plagued Rome in the final years of the Republic made one thing clear: power without protection was an invitation to betrayal. The instability, civil wars, and constant power struggles turned personal bodyguards from a luxury into a necessity. It was then that Augustus, Rome's first emperor, made a decision that would change history forever. He transformed these scattered protection units into a formal and permanent organization. Thus, the Praetorian Guard was born, a force of trusted soldiers who would not only protect the emperor, but also become a key piece in Rome's political game. What started as a defensive force would soon become a power of its own. The Praetorians would not only witness the rise and fall of emperors, they would decide their fate. The Praetorian soldiers were unlike the rest of the Roman army. They had unique privileges. While regular legionaries spent years on campaign, enduring hunger, cold, and brutal battles on the empire's frontiers, the Praetorians enjoyed a far more comfortable life in the capital. They were paid better, served for fewer years, and most importantly, their close proximity to the emperor gave them a power that no other military unit could match. But how did this group of bodyguards go from being mere protectors to becoming one of the most feared forces in Rome? Problem statement. When Augustus officially created the Praetorian Guard, he did so with a clear purpose: to consolidate his rule and ensure that no one could challenge his authority without consequences. Unlike the regular armies, which were scattered across the empire's borders, the Praetorian Guard was stationed in Italy, close to the heart of imperial power. From the very beginning, the Praetorians received special benefits that set them apart from the rest of the military. While a regular legionary had to serve for 25 years before earning a pension, a Praetorian only had to serve 16 years, making it a much more attractive career option. On top of that, their salary was significantly higher than that of a standard soldier, guaranteeing them a far more comfortable lifestyle. But it wasn't just about money and prestige. The Praetorians had direct access to the emperor, making them far more influential than any other military unit. Their commander, the Praetorian prefect, was not just a military leader, but also a close advisor to the emperor, often holding immense political power. Over time, this position became so important that some Praetorian prefects effectively ruled the empire from behind the throne, making crucial decisions that shaped Roman history. By the 1st century AD, the Praetorian Guard had solidified its authority and proved that it could do more than just protect the emperor. It could decide who ruled Rome. A perfect example of this came in 41 AD, when the Praetorians assassinated Caligula in a conspiracy involving senators and Roman elites. But the most shocking part wasn't the assassination itself. It was what happened next. Instead of allowing the Senate to restore the Republic, the Praetorians found Claudius, the timid and politically inexperienced uncle of Caligula, hiding behind a curtain in the imperial palace. In an unprecedented move, they declared him emperor themselves, proving that they, not the Senate, held the real power in Rome. From this moment on, every emperor knew one simple truth: if the Praetorian Guard was not on your side, your reign would not last long, and that loyalty had a price. The creation of the Praetorian Guard was a brilliant move by Augustus to consolidate his power, but also create a problem that no emperor could ever solve. How do you control those who have the power to overthrow you? The Praetorians were more than just soldiers. They became a privileged class within the empire. Their influence could make or break an emperor, and as their power grew, so did their ambition. What had begun as a force of protection soon turned into a political entity with its own interests. And when money and power were at stake, betrayal became just as effective as a sword. What would you do if your protector could decide whether you live or die? For Roman emperors, the Praetorian Guard was supposed to be their shield against conspiracies, or so they thought. In reality, these soldiers did not just protect the emperor. They could overthrow him if he was no longer useful. Over time, the Praetorians stopped being mere bodyguards and became a power in the shadows, capable of altering the course of Roman history with the swing of a sword. Problem statement. From its creation, the Praetorian Guard had unprecedented access to the very heart of imperial power. They were not only responsible for the emperor's security, but they also patrolled Rome, guarded the palace, and played an essential role in official ceremonies. Their presence commanded respect, but also fear. The problem arose when Praetorians realized they were not just protectors. They could choose who ruled the empire. Their first major display of power took place in 41 AD, when they participated in the assassination of Emperor Caligula, a conspiracy involving senators and members of the Roman elite. But the most shocking part was not the assassination itself. It was what happened next. Instead of allowing the Senate to restore the Republic, the Praetorians found Claudius, Caligula's timid and politically inexperienced uncle hiding behind a curtain in the imperial palace. In an act without precedent, they proclaimed him emperor themselves, proving that they, not the Senate, were the real decision-makers in Rome. This event marked the beginning of a new era. The Praetorian Guard was no longer just a military unit. It was a political power. Over time, their influence only grew. During the 2nd and 3rd centuries AD, the Praetorians actively shaped the imperial succession. In many cases, their support or rejection determined who would become the next emperor. One of the most extreme examples occurred in 193 AD, after the assassination of Emperor Pertinax. He had attempted to restore discipline within the guard after the excesses of Emperor Commodus, but his mistake was trying to reduce their privileges. In response, the Praetorians murdered him and, in an unprecedented act, auctioned off the imperial throne to the highest bidder. The winner of this disgraceful bidding war was Didius Julianus, a wealthy senator who simply offered more money than his rivals. With this act, the Praetorian Guard made one thing clear: the empire did not belong to Rome or its people. It belonged to those who could pay for their loyalty. The Praetorian Guard had become the ultimate power broker in Rome. They were no longer mere soldiers. They were the true kingmakers of the empire. Their loyalty was not based on duty or honor, but on whoever could offer them the greatest rewards and privileges. With every coup, with every emperor assassinated or sold to the highest bidder, the Praetorians weakened the empire's stability. What had begun as a force designed to protect Rome had turned into a destabilizing power. But there was one flaw in their strategy. By controlling the empire, they had made themselves too powerful, and when a force becomes too powerful, someone will always try to take it down. Sooner or later, the Praetorian Guard would face its greatest challenge, not from an emperor, but from a ruler who had no intention of negotiating with them. What happens when the soldiers who are supposed to protect you start selling their loyalty to the highest bidder? For Roman emperors, the Praetorian Guard went from being a reliable shield to a constant threat. It didn't matter how strong, wise, or popular a ruler was. If he failed to keep the Praetorians happy, his fate was sealed. As their ambition and corruption grew, the Guard ceased to be a protective force and became the empire's greatest political cancer. Problem statement. The assassination of emperors and the sale of the imperial throne marked the beginning of the Praetorian Guard's final decline. By the 3rd century AD, their corruption had reached extreme levels. No longer a unit loyal to the empire, they had become high-priced mercenaries, manipulating Roman politics for their own benefit. One of the most scandalous examples took place in 193 AD, after the murder of Emperor Pertinax. In a scene that resembled a modern auction, the Praetorian Guard put the imperial throne up for sale. Two candidates, Didius Julianus and Titus Flavius Sulpicius, competed to win their favor, offering more and more money in exchange for their support. In the end, Julianus won with a staggering bid of 25,000 sesterces for each Praetorian soldier, an astronomical sum that secured his place as emperor, but also sealed his doom. The people of Rome were outraged. How could the empire be treated as a mere commodity? The reaction was swift. Provincial generals, who still commanded loyal legions, refused to recognize an emperor who had simply bought his way to the throne. A civil war erupted. Within months, the general Septimius Severus marched into Rome, defeated Julianus, and punished Praetorians for their treachery. Severus disbanded the existing guard, replacing them with soldiers from his own legions. But the problem didn't disappear. Over time, other emperors tried different methods to control the Praetorians, bribing them, offering privileges, or even threatening them directly. However, the damage had already been done. By the 3rd century AD, the Roman Empire was spiraling into what is now known as the crisis of the 3rd century, a period of civil wars, foreign invasions, and emperors who barely lasted a few months in power. Rather than stabilizing Rome, the Praetorian Guard had become one of the main causes of its instability. The Praetorian Guard had ceased to be a military force and had transformed into a political mafia. Their loyalty was no longer based on duty, but on who could pay the highest price. Their ambition not only weakened the imperial throne, but also shattered the people's trust in Rome's rulers. By this point, the Praetorians were no longer soldiers. They were mercenaries of power. And like any mercenary, their time was running out. Rome could only tolerate corruption for so long. Sooner or later, someone would take action against them. And when that moment came, the Praetorian Guard would face its greatest challenge yet, its own destruction. After centuries of dominating Rome, someone had to put an end to them. The Praetorian Guard had been untouchable for generations. They had murdered emperors, sold a throne to the highest bidder, and used their power to enrich themselves at the expense of the empire. But in the 4th century, their arrogance led them to make their greatest mistake, challenging a man who had no intention of negotiating, Constantine the Great. Problem statement. The decline of the Praetorian Guard had begun long before its dissolution, but it was in the 4th century AD that their fate was sealed. By this time, Rome was no longer the same. The empire was divided, and internal struggles were fiercer than ever. In 306 AD, following the death of Emperor Constantius Chlorus, his son Constantine was proclaimed emperor by his troops in Britannia. However, in Rome, the Praetorian Guard supported another candidate, Maxentius, who declared himself emperor with the backing of the Pretorians and the senatorial elite. For 6 years, the empire was split between Constantine and Maxentius, with the Praetorian Guard acting as a key power in Rome. But in 312 AD, Constantine decided to end the dispute once and for all. He gathered his army and marched into Italy, facing Maxentius in the Battle of the Milvian Bridge. The battle was decisive. Constantine achieved a crushing victory, and Maxentius drowned in the Tiber River while trying to escape. With their emperor dead, the Praetorians found themselves completely exposed. They had no one left to protect them. When Constantine entered Rome as the undisputed ruler, he made one thing clear: there will be no mercy for the Praetorian Guard. As punishment for supporting Maxentius, he ordered the complete dissolution of the Guard. Their barracks in Rome were destroyed, their soldiers were either executed or dispersed into the regular legions, and their centuries-long reign of power came to an abrupt and humiliating end. It was the end of the Praetorian Guard. After more than 300 years, the force that had protected and betrayed emperors was erased from history with a single decree. The dissolution of the Praetorian Guard marked the end of an era. For centuries, they had been the most feared force within the empire, but their corruption and ambition had sealed their fate. The fact that Constantine could eliminate them without resistance proves how much they had declined. What had once been a prestigious force had become a group of mercenaries with no real purpose. However, their disappearance did not mean the end of military influence in Roman politics. In the following centuries, other groups, such as provincial generals and barbarian mercenaries, would take their place. The struggle for power in Rome never ended. It simply changed hands. Was the Praetorian Guard the greatest betrayal of the empire they swore to protect? For over 3 centuries, these soldiers were much more than mere bodyguards. They were the shadow of the emperors, the power behind the throne, the executioners, and the rulers of Rome from the shadows. But in the end, their corruption and ambition led to their downfall. Their story serves as a reminder of an uncomfortable truth. When power has no limits, loyalty becomes just another commodity. Problem statement. The Praetorian Guard was one of the most influential and controversial institutions in Roman history. Created to protect the stability of the empire, it ultimately did the exact opposite. The Praetorians turned imperial politics into a game of survival, where only those willing to pay for their loyalty could stay in power. While their destruction under Constantine ended centuries of Praetorian abuse, one question remains: were they truly responsible for Rome's instability, or were they just a symptom of a much deeper problem? The Praetorian Guard did not exist in isolation. Their power was a reflection of a system where absolute power bred distrust and conspiracies. The emperors who surrounded themselves with them knew that their authority depended on keeping them happy. In many cases, it was the rulers themselves who corrupted the Guard, granting them excessive privileges to buy their loyalty. However, their disappearance did not solve Rome's problems. After them, other military factions took control of the imperial succession. In the centuries that followed, legionary generals became the new power brokers, triggering civil wars and internal conflicts that weakened the empire even further. The story of the Praetorian Guard is not just an episode from the past. It is a warning about the relationship between power and corruption, a pattern that has repeated itself throughout history in different empires and governments. The Praetorians started as protectors and ended as executioners. Their legacy is not just in the emperors they helped rise and fall, but in the lesson they left behind. When a military force gains too much power within a government, sooner or later, it stops serving the state and begins serving itself. Their story shows us that unchecked ambition can destroy even the most powerful institutions. The Roman Empire may have withstood centuries of invasions and conflicts, but what truly weakened it was its internal struggles. Ultimately, the Praetorian Guard is a perfect example of how an institution born with the best intentions can become the greatest enemy of the very system it was meant to protect.